Rackspace's illogical hack, Hurricane hurts the hurts, unlimited power, NGINX One launches, NIST comes out with some new password policies, and we're going to do an AI security roundup in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone out there. It is October 2nd, which means it is officially spooky season. It's also National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and there's no better group to get your cybersecurity awareness news from than us here at the Rundown. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and on this National Smarties Day, I am joined by a smarty and one of our favorite Tech Field Day delegates, Mr. Jack Pollard. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here today.
Well, we're very excited to have you here. We've got a fun little group of stories that we've been scouring the internet for. That's been a busy week in news, but we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So, Jack, take it away.
So, hosting provider Rackspace realized they had a problem on their hands when one of their third-party tools was exploited to gain access to monitoring servers. While they didn't name the tool, it was later determined that a component of Science Logic was at fault. The self-hosted install fell victim to a zero-day exploit that doesn't currently have a CVE attached. Rackspace quickly took the interface offline to mitigate the damage. When pressed, Science Logic didn't disclose anything had happened or which tool was at risk to prevent further exploitation. Tom, that's pretty bad, isn't it?
It is, and I kind of, it's one of those things where you kind of have to empathize with Rackspace here because they have to monitor all their systems somehow, right? So they went with what is considered by most people to be an industry-leading tool. The problem, of course, is that nobody is immune from a zero-day. And what happened here is that attackers were able to get a hold of a really good one that had no kind of notifications whatsoever. We don't even know how they got in right now. All we know is that, what we assume is that it was Science Logic that allowed them in. Because you know how when companies are real cagey about saying what it was, but what it wasn't, and we can't do this, and we can't do that, they really only have one big system that they use to monitor. And when they said it was a monitoring system, the register was like, oh, we know what that is. So they reached out to Science Logic. And of course, Science Logic, wanting to save face, but also be able to protect their other customers, was like, oh, no, we're not going to say anything because it could impact future things. Mum's the word. Don't tell anybody. I think what's going to happen is that once Rackspace gets done pulling this thing apart, we're going to get a proper CVE for it, which means that we're going to be able to take care of it. The other thing is Rackspace would really like you to know that while they did take the interface to work on the dashboard offline so that nobody could get to it, they were still monitoring all of your stuff, which means, of course, you still have to pay your bills. But I think we're going to start seeing more and more of these kinds of things. For something like this to have been targeted so efficiently and for it to have been a completely unknown zero day with no news or notifications at all, that tends to lead more towards the professional and or sponsored scene where they're really looking to gain footholds into these monitoring systems to be able to leverage that data for either future attempts to hack providers or good old-fashioned extortion with lots and lots of data. I'm starting to lean more toward foothold simply because the extortion path seems to be kind of drying up a little bit, as we saw in the news a couple of weeks ago when Fortinet got hacked and they refused to pay the ransom. So the guy's just like, whatever, I'm going to release the data. I think for something like this, the data is not what's critical. It's what you can do with it. And it's worthless to Rackspace, right? I'm going to tell you the up-down stats on a whole bunch of interfaces. I think it's more important that they prevent these things from being areas where people can kind of slide in and persist for, years in some cases. So good on you, Rackspace, for fixing this. Just make sure we're getting a little bit better disclosures next time. All right, Jack, there were some devastating floods in North Carolina this week due to a hurricane, and the town of Spruce Pine was affected. Now, you may not know what Spruce Pine is, but it's one of the only sources of pure quartz in America, and that could threaten the supply chain for a lot of microchips and solar panels. The town produces ultra-high quality quartz that's essential for manufacturing semiconductors. Experts have warned that prolonged disruption due to flooding and other damage could have far-reaching consequences. Now, of course, we've been glued to the news watching all of the recovery efforts that have been going on so far. The world is kind of holding its breath, and we're a little bit curious to make sure that the people in Quartz Pine in Spruce Pine are safe, but also how that could affect the quartz mines and what we've seen so far with even minor supply chain disruptions, how the ripple effects can last for years. So, Jack, I mean, are you worried that the Spruce Pine quartz mines are going to be adversely affected?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Right now, it's not clear. We just don't have enough information on whether the mine is affected. But we do know that the town of Spruce Pine, along with hundreds of other little tiny towns in the mountains of Western North Carolina, have been affected by the storm. Now, ironically, I was actually planning on going out vacation to see the fall leaves change in 2 weeks and had an Airbnb reservation in the town of Spruce Pine. So this is sort of near and dear to my heart. What I've been able to determine so far is that there are many different two-lane roads that cross the tiny rivers there. And a lot of the bridges have been washed out. So the mines are serviced only by two-lane blacktop. And it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to get stuff to and from the mines for at least a few weeks, if not months, while everything gets rebuilt. Now, where this becomes critical is what the mines you are producing and what they're used for. And they produce what we call high purity quartz, which is 99.999% pure or better. So basically, a few parts per billion of impurities. And why this is important is we use those quartz to create a crucible or a container for holding molten silicon as you grow a silicon wafer, or actually a silicon ingot. So to create a microchip, first you have to create pure silicon. And again, the silicon you want to be 99.999% pure or better, because any impurity affects the electrical properties of the silicon and can cause your chip to go bad. So you create a crystal of silicon in a crucible and you grow that to something on the order of 2 meters or about 6 feet in length by about a foot or more in diameter. And these things weigh a couple hundred pounds, 300 to 500 pounds. And then you slice those into wafers that are less than a millimeter thick. And that becomes the base for every chip manufactured. And right now, the mines that are run by a company called Sibelco produce almost all of the high purity quartz used in growing crystals, silicon crystals for semiconductor manufacturing, actually worldwide. So this could be a very big problem that affects the supply chain in semiconductors. It will also affect the supply chain and the cost for solar panels. And as we transition from coal and natural gas to solar and wind energy, this is going to make the cost of energy much more expensive. So we have a supply chain issue, we have an energy problem, and it's really going to be a challenge to see how this affects the semiconductor industry. And that's not to say that we've ignored the people and that are being affected in the area. There's, over 150 deaths already and more deaths. And so my heart goes out to all the people in Spruce Pine and all of Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. This has just been a really bad situation all around. The rapidly growing demands of artificial intelligence are sparking a new era in nuclear energy as tech giants and U.S. government join forces to meet the power-hungry needs of AI data centers. With AI's insatiable thirst for energy driving a surge in electricity demand, major players like Microsoft and Google are turning to nuclear power as clean energy, as a clean and reliable solution for energy. From restarting dormant reactors to investing in cutting edge nuclear technology, the AI revolution is breathing new life into the US nuclear energy sector. And again, with the hurricane affecting the Spruce Pine mine and affecting the availability of solar panels, I think the energy sector is really going to change. What can you tell us about this?
I think it's interesting that we've started to kind of dust off the old standards, if you will. to kind of look at what we're doing. I am a huge proponent of clean energy. I love the idea of solar. I live in Oklahoma, so wind is not a problem for us. I mean, there's these gigantic complexes of windmills, and they are great to offset what we're currently using from our energy production. Like, how people were saying, oh, we're going to have to worry about electric cars, and how are we going to manage to do that? Electric cars are a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of power that we're consuming with AI right now. Like, all you need to do is go look at the fact that a lot of those forward-looking sustainability statements that were put into these, prospectuses and things like that from large companies like Microsoft and Apple and others mysteriously disappeared in the last year or so. Not sure why. Could it have anything to do with the fact that they're spending billions upon billions of dollars doing AI research and consuming more power than your average Bitcoin mining operation? Might have something to do with it. But here's the thing that kills me, okay? So everybody have a seat, because this is kind of one of those whiplash moments. Nuclear power in the late 70s was a huge thing for the US, right? Like, we were building nuclear power plants as fast as we could do that. I know that because my dad was a general contractor on Vogel, Callaway, and Wolf Creek, which were nuclear power plants in Missouri, Georgia, and Kansas. My dad worked for Westinghouse when I was very little and was a very busy human being. But after Wolf Creek, I mean, there was one that they were working on in Michigan that I don't ever actually think that one opened. But interest tailed off because of a little thing called 3 Mile Island, where there was an incident, not an explosion like Chernobyl, an incident where some steam was released that was irradiated, right? Do you know how we found out that they're investigating new nuclear plants? Microsoft is restarting the reactors at 3 Mile Island. Irony, stop cutting so hard. Like, I get it, okay? Nuclear power plants are actually the perfect solution to this problem. And we had a story that we did earlier this year where Amazon was talking about using small-scale nuclear reactors to run data centers. Great idea. Nuclear power has everything that an AI supercluster needs. It is consistent. It is predictable. It does not need to have a lot of storage. That's one of the problems with a wind farm. A wind farm creates power, and then you're kind of stuck, right? Like, you have to use it, or you have to store it, or you have to shunt it around the grid. If you've ever driven through an area with a lot of windmills, you'll notice that some of them are off a lot of the time. Partially it's due to maintenance reasons, but it's also because, like, electrical power generation from a windmill, like, you have to adjust things. You don't get that with a nuclear power plant, right? Your output wattage is controlled by the amount of fissile material that's in there and the control rods and all the other stuff. Just go watch the HBO show Chernobyl. They'll give you a great lesson in nuclear power. But more importantly, as demand increases, you can increase the amount of energy there. You can bring new reactors online, because here's something a lot of people don't know. Only one of the reactors at 3 Mile Island shut down. The rest of them ran for years. Even the other reactors at Chernobyl ran for years. In fact, I believe they're still running because it turns out that you kind of need that to generate power. But what we've got to do is we've got to get these companies to kind of get over this stigma of nuclear power being, quote unquote, bad. If you consider the number of times that we've had other kinds of energy outages over the years, coal power plants and other kinds of unsavory stuff, nuclear power is relatively safe. The unsafe part is, how do we get rid of the material? But if you want a good primer on how nuclear power works, there's a YouTube channel out there run by a guy named Kyle Hill that is amazing for you to check this stuff out. I think we're going to start having a lot more conversations about nuclear power going forward, because we have infrastructure in place from a lot of reactors. We have the ability to scale those reactors up relatively quickly, and we're not dependent on natural resources. But I stress this: we should not shut down our existing clean energy efforts. Nuclear power should go to augment additional drain on the power grids. This is for AI. This is for crypto mining. This is for all those other things. By the way, get some of those crypto miners to pay for the renovations that 3 Mile Island's going to need, because I promise you, they have a lot of fake money, and we can use that to do stuff. All right, Jack, F5 has launched NGINX One. It's an integrated application networking platform that simplifies the management, load balancing, API, cybersecurity across a variety of hybrid cloud environments. It's a SaaS platform, and it centralizes deployment and management of NGINX interfaces. Then it also provides all those cool things like telemetry and AI capabilities, which helps, of course, streamline DevOps workflows. It also reduces complexity of managing modern cloud-native applications. By enabling more dynamic and flexible provisioning of networking services, the aim of NGINX One is to replace rigid legacy approaches and adapt evolving IT needs. It sounds like this is something that a lot of people are really interested in a modern environment. What are some of the benefits of NGINX One that you see?
Well, I think it's really that modernization from, as you said, the rigid legacy approaches. And let's sort of talk about that. In the olden days, you built a monolithic application. It had one network interface and it talked to the world. And then we realized that we needed to do a little bit of load balancing. So we had this rigid application, couldn't do much with it. So we put another device in front of it that provided additional network ports and additional load balancing. And it could actually then direct traffic to multiple instances of this monolithic application. As we started moving from rigid application, monolithic, giant applications into containers, Kubernetes, and serverless type environments in the modern DevOps world, we now have multiple interfaces, multiple network interfaces, multiple ways to talk to the application. Plus, we have application programming interfaces and user interfaces, and they come off different network ports. And we have multiple instances spread throughout the world because we have to serve global customer bases. So that means we have a very complex network environment where our applications need to be able to support multiple network interfaces and multiple ports, multiple communication channels. And managing that can be very complex. It can be even harder when your application developers are focused on developing the application and may not understand the implications of various different network issues. So I think with this NGINX One SaaS interface, we now have a management plane, control plane that enables application developers to very simply and easily build applications without really focusing on the network side of the world. And this simplification will really help developers focus on the core features and functionality of the application, not so much on the networking, not so much on the load balancing, and hand that off to basically the pros in the business. Coming from F5, which actually developed the original load balancers, I think this is a great move, and to provide a SaaS interface and to have basically a modern DevOps interface to the networking environment. So I think there's a lot of interest, and this is going to be provide a lot of simplification for the developers and the ability to move faster, and as we like to say in sort of startup land, move faster, break things faster, and build better tools. So in something near and dear to my heart, Tom, it looks like NIST is changing password guidelines. In a new draft with a boring name, NIST is making suggestions about password policies. First and foremost, getting rid of the change password frequently requirement. Now we're getting into supporting longer passwords, longer minimum length and longer maximum lengths, and providing Unicode options and even guidance on password hints and knowledge-based questions. However, as is typical with standards documents, the prompts fall back on things like shall and should variations, which means we may not get everything that we want. Tom, what's NIST's thinking here?
NIST's thinking is that people are really bad at password hygiene, and we've got to do everything we can to make that better. They basically have said, stop using complexity requirements as your barrier to entry, right? And they know that there's a reason for that. Anybody who is well-versed in the internet's favorite leet speak knows this. Ones and L's become exclamation points, twos become ats, and A's become ats. And you have a password that looks very secure and is about 3 seconds faster to crack because you create basically the equivalencies in your cracking tool. John the Ripper is really good at this stuff. But what they realized is that most people do that for mnemonic reasons, right? Whereas we've known for a really long time that passphrases are much more secure because what they allow us to do is have kind of a cognitive password. For example, if you'll allow me to nerd out for just a second, if you've ever read any books from the Battletech universe, you know that mechs have a startup sequence and they have a check code that is unique to each individual mech warrior. And so they have to speak the phrase in their own tone of voice with their own their own cadence. And if the mech detects that that's not the case, it locks them out. That was a brilliant idea that we came up with in the 80s, because what we realized is that I may know a thing that nobody else knows, right? Think about Captain Marvel. Tell me something that is quirky about you that nobody else knows, as a way to prove that you're not a Skrull. But here, we've always had a problem with that. Why? Because you can't put a space in a password. Well, NIST is saying now all printable ASCII characters should be allowed to be valid password characters, including the space, because we shouldn't be delimiting passwords with spaces anymore, because we should be hashing them and checking the hash value to determine if they're valid. Also, Unicode characters that only take up one character. That was one of the other big problems we had. Unicode is bigger. It's more bits per storage character, so passwords were growing out of whatever. I also like the fact that the password hint should not be given to an unauthenticated user in plain text. Like, that's a biggie, right? Like, don't let people guess your password hints. Also, knowledge-based questions. We've got to come up with better ways to do that, because I can find out what the first make and model of your car was. I can find out what street you lived on as a kid. Hell, there are Facebook like memes dedicated to that, right? I much prefer was it the nihilistic version? You know, when was the first year that you finally gave up hope? Because as it's joking as it sounds, that's actually not something that you can Google. But again, kind of like you mentioned, any standards document is going to run into one big problem. What should you do versus what do you have to do? I am a huge, don't put shall, put should. And if you look down this document, there's a lot of shoulds that are like the bare minimum, right? Like, you shall offer a password up to 64 characters in length. You should require 8. There's a big difference between those two. So I think hopefully with NIST putting these policies out here and kind of driving forward with what we need to do, I hope that a lot of companies are going to adopt them. But more importantly, just like any way to get this done, I hope that NIST requires anybody doing business with the US federal government to adopt these and require certain minimums. I mean, that's how we've driven IPv6 adoption for the last couple of years, is that you basically have to have it if you want to do business with the government, because there's no better way to enforce a rule than to make it a rule. So good luck to the folks at NIST, and, keep on passwording. All right, Jack, we had a few stories that we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at, because they all kind of revolve around a theme about AI safety. So we're calling this our AI Safety Roundup. The first one is a story that we kind of picked apart, if you want to call it that, earlier on the rundown, and that's from our good old friends at Microsoft. They've announced a significant overhaul of that controversial AI-powered recall feature. Now, you may remember that it was kind of one of those things that allowed you to record stuff that was going on in your PC, and the innocent reasoning behind it was, oh, if you ever make a mistake or you forget what you were doing, you could go back and figure things out. Well, a lot of people didn't like that. And there were huge privacy concerns, right? Somebody can go back and dig things out. Well, they responded to those concerns by implementing full encryption, virtualization-based security, and Windows Hello authentication for the feature, especially the ones that are taking screenshots of user activity. It also includes the ability to completely uninstall recall. Yay! Of course, that is at odds with the approach that they're taking to integrating AI capabilities deeply into Windows, as the investors are clamoring for, because AI is the new oil. And that means that they're going to be prioritizing things like user control and data protection and giving the control of this back to the users. So, Jack, I'm going to let you jump in here because you're a big security and privacy advocate. Is Microsoft going far enough with recall to say definitively that we've slayed this beast?
Yes, I think they are actually, and I find it's surprising. I find myself saying that. So I think there's a couple things that are very important here. First is moving it from a mandatory to an opt-in experience, and the second is making sure you can, when you uninstall it, that it removes everything from the system. So that's really big on the privacy concern. The other thing they've done, which I think is really key and important, is the database that stores all of the AI data, your screenshots and whatever else it captures, is protected by your TPM, your trusted platform module, which means that only you can authorize anybody to get to it. Even if someone who has an administrator rights on the PC can't get to that database and can't decrypt it to get access to the contents without you being there and somehow physically being present and authorizing it with your PIN, your face, or your fingerprints. So I think that's really key from the privacy concerns. Um, Now, the other part of this that I think people sometimes forget is these types of features have been around for many years, and they've been incorporated into insider threat security tools. So there are a number of tools, whether it's a specific insider threat tool or a corporate CASB cloud access security broker tool or other tools that will record user actions when they're going to a corporate website. Or corporate, or for developers accessing corporate infrastructure. So the tools themselves have been around a long time. It's simply that this type of tool has been included as part of the operating system from Microsoft. But from a security and privacy perspective, that you're giving the user total control over this, I think is very important and key. The other thing I think is Microsoft is really, there's a big push here that these are all tied towards Microsoft's Copilot Plus PC. So it's really a move to get users to buy a new PC. So it's being pushed not only by Microsoft, but by all the hardware developers.
So the first thing I will say is this is what Microsoft should have done 3 years ago when they released Windows 11. They should have tied features directly to the TPM because TPM is required to install Windows 11. So spoiler alert out there, guys, you can't get this with Windows 10. And I know a lot of you were looking at doing that. I love the fact that you can rip the whole thing out. Listen, I'm running the beta for Apple Intelligence on my laptop right now, or my iPad right now. It needs some polish. They all do. So far, nothing's given me pause, but I'm also not worried because I've seen the documentation of what Apple's doing with Apple Intelligence and how much of it's on device versus being, somewhere else, and what I have control over and what I can see and what I can tweak and tune and all that other stuff. But I think that the last point that you made is kind of critical, and it's not a positive critical. The reason why they want everybody to go out and buy these new Copilot Plus PCs is because they have those NPUs in them. And if you don't have Copilot installed, do you really need an NPU? I don't think it's massively increased the MSRP of these laptops because they have extra hardware in there. But I also worry that the reason why they weren't massively increased was the same reason that you can't buy a non-smart TV anymore, is because basically the people who are putting the smart features in there are underwriting this. And I wondered, oh, well, how much access are we going to get to the Copilot data that we've collected? I would hope the answer is none, but I'm also a security nerd, and I know that the answer is probably not that. So we'll see if Microsoft neutering recall to appeal to a privacy conscious group of people out there is actually going to sink their efforts to sell more Copilot PCs. I hope not.
Well, I hope not too, but I really think that what we don't know right now is really how useful the recall feature is going to be. And that's really what's going to drive adoption more than anything else. And because recall is designed to be more useful over time as it learns more and more about you and your behaviors, we won't really know the true utility for months, if not years. So I think the next sort of safety topic, AI safety topic we want to talk about was California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed California Senate Bill 1047 this week. And this bill was aimed at regulating AI models and forcing developers to impose safety and kill switches. And Newsom stated the reason behind the veto is the specifics behind the size of the model would be subject to scrutiny. The model really, the size limits were based on the amount of dollars used to create the model, and it was something like 100 million. So that really was only a few of the very large models, and a lot of the smaller models wouldn't be subject to it. So he said that basically some of the smaller models could be more harmful as a result because they wouldn't be subject to this. There were proponents on both sides of the aisle supporting and defending this, and it's really the AI aisle, not the Republican Democrat aisle. But so, what's really the issue here? And is the regulation crucial, or does it go far enough, or doesn't it go far enough, Tom?
It doesn't go far enough. And I'll tell you why, is because when you end up getting into a point where you have to compromise on these things, you have to draw a line somewhere, right? And Newsom, or at least the sponsors of the bill, thought that the line to draw was north of this, dollar amount, right? Well, like you said, there aren't a whole lot of models out there that are north of that dollar amount. It just so happens that the ones that are the companies that everybody is so concerned about, like OpenAI and Google and other ones. But there's nothing to say that I can't game the system, right? So let's say the line's $100 million. Okay. So I drop off and I say, I'm going to create this new OpenAI model. We'll call it not evil AI. As long as I only put $90 million worth of research into not evil AI, I'm not subject to any of that stuff. And if it looks like I'm about to go over, I fork that model and recreate it again, starting from zero, so that all of my models are iterative. I'm still getting the same results in different projects, only now they're under the threshold for reporting. And then you're going to have someone go, oh, well, we've got to lower the threshold. So they take it down to, I don't know, $50 million. Well, now when the project gets to $45 million, I just fork it again. Do you see how when you draw a line in the sand, you're always going to have people who are dancing on either side of that line, right? The problem isn't tagging things. The problem is you've got to look at what's going on. You have to have more comprehensive regulation, and you're going to have to pick a different way to do it. And here's the problem. You're going to have people who are going to get really furious at you that you're trying to stifle their competition and censor them. And yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Because, and this is one of my favorite talking points recently, what is the point of a corporation? It is to make money. Yeah, throw all the nonprofit crap out the window, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute. The purpose of a company is to make money and not break the law, because breaking the law leads to fines and all kinds of other stuff, which means you make less money. It does not say anything about taking care of the workers, bettering society, or, keeping people from getting chopped up in sausage making machines. That's things that we've had to add protections in to prevent things from, like, I don't know, catching the Cuyahoga River on fire because it's cheaper to dump chemicals in it than it is to have them sent somewhere else. We have to have good regulation on this. And this is an emerging area that we know very little about. Even the experts in the field don't know a whole lot about it. So how can you regulate it? Well, you're going to have to do research. You're going to have to take a few shots at this law and get it right over time. The problem is, we're also facing an election year here in the US. And so people needed to feel like they had to get something out there to say that they were looking at the problem. But when you rush legislation out to appease the vocal minority, whoever they happen to be, you're going to get it wrong every time. Mark my words. What you've got to do is you got to take a more measured approach and make sure you're getting everything. Because anybody who's ever played online games know, as soon as you make a rule, there's going to be a group of people that are going to try to exploit right up to that rule and then claim, well, it wasn't against the rule. Why did you ban me from doing this? And I think that's what we're kind of getting into now. It's the whole, like, if this car weighs 5,000 pounds less, then it's technically not classified as a light truck, so it doesn't have to meet these certain MPG guidelines. And if you wanted to know why every pickup truck on the road is so friggin' enormous now, it literally is to beat MPG requirements. So, Jack, I mean, am I off base here? Or should we have passed this bill and just said, YOLO, deal with the consequences?
No, I don't think you're off base. And this is always the challenge with regulation is, or I should say high-tech regulation is, high-tech moves at a pace that is much faster, orders of magnitude faster than government. And governments and regulators are always, behind the curve and chasing their tails, trying to figure out how to regulate something that's moving so quickly. And as you said, there's also always the opportunity to game the system. So I think the legislature needs to basically say, we understand that. Let's take a moment, do our research, and say, how can we craft a regulation that protects everybody while not stifling innovation and not just making it so that it's so obvious about how to work around the regulations to get what we want, which is more money.
All right. Well, I alluded to it, but you remember that great OpenAI power struggle? Man, it seems like it was forever ago. I looked it up. It was actually November of last year. It was 11 months. I guess it's time for another one. In this particular case, CTO Mira Murati, Research VP Barrett Zoff, and Chief Research Officer Bob McGrew all announced that they were leaving basically at the same time. You may wonder, man, when executives bail out on a company, what's happening? Well, we saw a story coming in from Reuters that said that OpenAI is potentially going to restructure the company away from that nonprofit focus and look more like a startup that would consolidate a whole lot of power in CEO Sam Altman. Oh, you remember Sam Altman, the guy that got fired in that power struggle back in November because people feared that he was taking the company in the wrong direction. And then, of course, he managed to stage a reverse coup and get all of his unfriendly people unseated from the board and took back over. And yeah, we never talked about that again, right? I mean, where do we even start unpacking this whole thing? You've got three major high profile people in the company that all announced they're all leaving within like a day of each other. You've got a news story coming out saying you're trying to consolidate power. Man, if this was like 17th century Europe, I would expect a Spanish armada to come sailing out of San Francisco Bay anytime soon.
Well, that's an interesting analogy, and I think it's actually a very apt analogy because really there's two things going on here. One is we are discovering the new world of AI, and two, as you talked about in our previous segment, there's a tremendous amount of money involved. And I mean, let's be real, this is real money that is unheard of back for startups in any other environment. We're talking about funding rounds of hundreds of millions to billions of dollars as opposed to $5 to $10 million funding or 20 or $30 million funding rounds. So I think people are looking at this from inside and outside OpenAI and outside in the rest of the AI world and saying, there's all this money floating around. I need to grab a piece of that cash before it disappears. Now, if you look at let's talk about people first and then the company. If you think about the people first, how much salary can they get by being part of a nonprofit such as OpenAI? It's clear that people think that they can go in the open market, just like a professional sports player, and in open bidding get a lot more money. And I think that's probably behind the motivations. They may speak and wave their hands around the mission and various other concerns, but the amount of money that's floating around in AI is truly stunning. I think the second thing is when you look at the company in OpenAI and what OpenAI wants to do, what they really want to do, they can only do by being a public company, a for-profit company rather than a non-for-profit. And they're talking about needing investments in the hundreds of billions of dollars because they want to invest billions of dollars in data centers alone to support all of the models that they're building. When you look at all this money swimming around, like I said, who wouldn't want a piece of that? And I don't see this stopping anytime soon.
No, and I'll be honest here. I'm prognosticating and getting on my little soapbox a little bit. This has never been about whether or not OpenAI is a nonprofit. I mean, realistically speaking, they haven't been a nonprofit for years because they've always been focused on making money. But being a nonprofit gives them a shield whenever they're losing money hand over fist because nobody cares about AI. And it was great when you could talk about all the philanthropic work you're doing and deduct it off of your taxes and all this other stuff. And then a funny thing happened. Everybody wanted AI all of a sudden, and the genie was out of the bottle. And now there's billions, if not trillions of dollars floating around out there that people are literally willing to sink into anything. It's the Beanie Babies craze all over again. I don't care if it says Bernie Babies. It looks like a Beanie Baby, and I'm going to buy into it. But then Altman ran into a problem. I'm a nonprofit. I can't make money. And so now he's going to have to transform the company because that pretty little shield is now a wall keeping him from being the next Jensen Huang. So what is ultimately going to happen is they are going to have to transform the company. But when you hired a whole bunch of people on the premise that you were going to be doing nonprofit good works using AI for all these other things, that money grab looks a little bad. And I will admit, you're absolutely right. It's, the scene in Beverly Hills Cop. It's like, in this one hand, I've got all of my outrage at the fact that the company is doing bad things. and I want to go somewhere else. What if I gave you something in this hand that would make you forget about what's in this hand? Say, like, I don't know, like $15 million a year. I forgot all about my outrage. AI is totally fine, however we want to use it. What I would say is, if you want to make a stand against Sam Altman and his plans to do whatever he's going to do with AI, make another nonprofit foundation, take a small salary, and fight against it. Create better regulation. Work on ways to hamstring what he's doing, not how he's doing it. Because as we learned last November, while he may have detractors inside of the company, he has powerful friends that will do whatever it takes to make sure his vision is executed. And if that makes him sound like the Emperor from Star Wars, you're not far off. And that's the problem that we're dealing with here, is there's only so many people inside of a company that can stand up and do this. And the worst part is, the people who are quitting in droves are the executives who have no real power to impact this. Who are the ones who are still there doing the work? The people who are writing the code and creating iterations to make more money. And I'm sure that they are incentivized to do that. But if the people who are doing the day-to-day work all suddenly up and left OpenAI because they were protesting what Sam was doing, I promise you he'd change his tune really fast. When the money hose gets turned off, suddenly you don't make it so well anymore. It's been a busy week, but luckily we have a lot of great stuff coming up that we want to tell you about. We have just finished posting a whole lot of videos from the events that we've been doing for the last few weeks, including AI Field Day 5, Edge Field Day 3. I just finished posting the videos that we recorded at Networking Field Day at Nokia last week. They're up now. If you want to go check those out, Nokia EDA is a really cool platform. And if you're wondering why Steven's not here, it's because he's currently in the middle of AI Data Infrastructure Field Day number 1. That's going to be Google Cloud, HPE, Infinidat, MinIO, Pure Storage, and Solidigm. We're going to take a week off. Steven's got some stuff going on. I've got some stuff going on. And then I'm going to be back in San Francisco for Security Field Day 12. We're going to be hearing from Citrix, Dell, DigiCert, and SonicWall. And then literally the next week, Steven's back at it again with Cloud Field Day. So make sure you are going to techfieldday.com to check out all the list of all of the things that are going on. We have the schedule lineup through the rest of the year, and you're going to want to set your calendars because there's a lot of stuff that you don't want to miss. Jack, speaking of that, if there's stuff that people don't want to miss that you're involved in, where can they go to find that out?
Well, ironically, I'm actually going to be joining Stephen for Cloud Field Day 21, and I was with him for both AI Field Day 5 and Edge Field Day 3, so it's going to be a reunion of sorts. We learned a lot of great stuff at both of those. It's definitely worthwhile watching. I'll just note that, we talked today about the power requirements for AI and nuclear power coming on. And we learned at AI Field Day 5 that a single 6-foot rack for doing AI training consumes 120 kilowatts. That's the equivalent of 10 houses of electricity. That's why the nuclear power is becoming so important. And also part of what's driving the need for so much money being invested in OpenAI and all the other AI companies.
Well, we appreciate that, and we look forward to seeing you again as a part of our wonderful field day. And if you are a fan of our rundown, we hope that you join us every Wednesday for our new episodes. They are broadcast on YouTube as well as in your favorite podcast application of choice if you prefer the audio-only version. We also feature these on our sister site at TechStrong TV. And you can catch us on all the other TechStrong and Futurum Group properties out there. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about all of the cool stuff that happened between, right now and then. And if you have anything you'd like to let us know about, make sure you send that over. We're on all the social medias, or you can just drop us an email. We're always happy to do that. But we look forward to your feedback. We look forward to reading your comments and hearing your rave reviews, or maybe fixing your not so rave ones. But until next week, make sure that you stay a little bit spooky, but not too spooky. And keep an eye out for those AIs that are listening in on you. We'll be back with more great episodes of The Rundown next week. We'll see you soon.